All right. Welcome to the Call to Farms podcast. I'm your host, Tim Ing. I'm here with my lovely wife, Sophie.
Hey, everyone.
And we have a real treat for you today. We have Shawn and Beth Dougherty. They really don't need any introduction because if you know who's who in the homesteading world, then you would know Shawn and Beth Dougherty. And Shawn and Beth Dougherty have been farming together since the 1980s. And for the last 20 years in Eastern Ohio, where their home farm is 27 acres, designated by the state as not suitable for agriculture. So we're going to have to ask about that. And using sunlight, rainfall, and intensive grazing as the primary sources of food energy, they raise dairy and beef cows, sheep, farm-fed hogs, and a variety of poultry, producing most of the food and feed on the farm. Concerned that farming is so often dependent upon multiple off-farm resources from feed, fuel, and fertilizer to water and electricity, their ongoing project is to identify and test the means by which farming was done for centuries with a minimum of off-farm inputs. Their research has led them to identify grass conversion, especially the daily conversion of grass into milk by dairy ruminants, as a key to whole farm sustainability, combined with the integrated nutrient feedbacks that are possible with a community of diverse animal and plant species, domestic and native. And they are the authors of the Independent Farmstead at Chelsea Green Press, which was published in 2016. So it's such a treat. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's really fun to be interviewed by another couple.
That's right. That is fun.
That's great.
And that we're both Chelsea Green authors at that too.
There you go. That's right.
And I feel like we've known you since fairly early in your Tennessee iteration. Is that right? I feel like we met you not that long after you moved there. We met it at the Tennessee Women's Retreat.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
That was a lot of fun. And we had just here, we were probably our first year in. Mm-hmm. So we already had many stories to tell.
Yeah. That's really cool. I got to meet Shawn at a women's retreat.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And I still go to those women's retreats.
Yeah.
I can't keep him home. He just won't stay.
Well, aside from all the farming, we just admire your marriage so much because we just, like, you are our mentors in more ways than one, from farming to definitely marriage and family, the way that you are together at these conferences. I mean, it's like you are newlyweds. And I love that because as we know, as farming, sometimes, our toughest days are out there on the farm. Like, the farm has really stretched us in our marriage. And then when we think about our children too, your children are a perfect example and such a great testament to how you have raised your 8 or 9 children?
8, right.
8 children. Wow. And how, truly you are the blueprint. And if every family can follow what you both have created, and I truly mean it from
divide by 10 and we're getting close. Wendell Berry, so many times, as he critiques modern culture, if you can even call it that, says that one of the things that we're missing is that we don't have the situation in which to enact our familyhood. That families are related in more than just like checkbook and address. And I think when you talk about having your days on the farm together, I think those are the substance whereby we enact marriage. Like it's fine. Like, marriage is a shared bed and maybe shared incomes, but what it really is that need that makes you, when you're cranky and it's 94 degrees outside and dinner's late and everybody's tired, makes you not necessarily be nice, but know that there is nowhere else, nothing else that you would do.
Yeah. That family's worth that.
That's so beautiful. Yesterday, Tim, in the middle of the day, it was like during lunchtime, the kids came running in and said, "Daddy's shearing the sheep." And we weren't supposed to sheep until Sunday. He was supposed to train the sheep to go to the corral, but he just decided to shear the sheep, and it was lunchtime, and I heard that, and it's hot at noon, and I'm like, what is Daddy doing? But I just, quickly changed my clothes, and I ran out there, and I'm like, okay, we're in this together. It is not easy.
I saw that they were in there. I got them in with the feed. I'm like, well, why not just start shearing?
Right. Well, working together, I think, is really, it's been the thing that I think people say pray together. I think that's very, very important. But I also think working together is really critical, that we have jobs that, there are some jobs that just are family jobs, bringing in hay or, digging the potatoes or doing things like that, that everybody needs to be there.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that you're describing is that feeling, Tim, that life is full of these jobs, which we can either, sort of dread and put off, or you just jump in and get them done. And life is then one long series of minor triumphs as you get to take things off the list.
Right.
I'm glad you got the sheep sheared.
So was that your first time to shear?
By ourselves. It was our first time. We've sheared before, but what you just said, Beth, one of our mentors says, instead of I have to milk, I get to milk today.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Good way to.
I often think that too. There will be at the really difficult moments, or maybe sometimes just the extreme weather moments, I reflect that this is the price that I pay for an entire life of getting to be out in the elements. And, I think it's classic that human beings dream of being able to talk to the animals and plants, to communicate with them. And people don't realize that's what farmers do. We do. They don't answer in English, but we get that satisfaction of being on intimate terms with the plants and animals. And if you have to get through some adverse jobs and adverse weather, so be it.
Yeah.
That's right. Tim was saying, I'm like, why are you deciding to do this now? And he said, we've got so much on the list to do. So if I can cross one item off, just do it now.
Right.
Didn't it feel good?
It was good.
Crossing the item off.
And now it didn't do the way that the sheep came out. I mean, there was some blood. It wasn't very
Did you have
clean.
to stitch anybody?
No stitching. So we just put some
Okay.
salve on. We're okay. But I likened it to how I make pancakes. The first couple are not that good, but after the fourth or fifth one, they come out.
Sure,
That's funny.
absolutely.
Oh, yeah,
And the
I
only
thought
way to
there were
learn
things
it is
like
to
that.
jump in and do it. And
Yes,
if you're
it is.
constantly saying, well, I can't do that until so-and-so's here or something like that, you'll never get it done.
Yep.
Right.
We had a 16-month-old Jersey bull we needed to castrate week before.
Yeah.
And it's not like we haven't castrate. We usually band, but it's not like we haven't used a knife. But it's never a pleasant job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we put it off. Well, we let him do his job, and then we got the whole family involved and immobilized him and did the surgery. And life is full of things that are new experiences, or at least every time you have them, like giving a jugular IV to a cow with milk fever, that you think, I could have gone my whole life without this particular job. But it sort of establishes the breadth, like the width of our farming experience, that we do these things we never imagined ourselves doing. And we do them, with a certain, like your sheep, it's effective. We get it done.
Yeah, it needs to get done. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's end of July, and we have East Frisian sheep. And as I was shearing the wool, I felt so bad because I could feel the heat coming from
Right.
here. And I was like, oh no, are we failing? Are we doing too much? And should we just start off? And these are our East Frisian sheep from California. So, so we didn't have the humidity that we do here. So we're starting to learn about how if we say no in a season, that will be okay. If we have to sell a milk cow because it's too much for us, we have to be okay with that. And
we also learn a lot about local so that it's not just local food and it's not just local neighbors, but it's local animals. Animals really do well in their local environment. And when we bring an animal from another environment, it may not be the right animal.
So much pasture wisdom is learned, older generation to younger generation among grazing animals. And we sometimes have that experience of getting the animal that's inappropriate in order to find out what appropriate looks like.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a whole trial and error process.
Oh, it's tremendously so. And that's such a great thing for people to hear, that people who have been doing it for many, many years have just as many trials and errors and struggles. And, it's just, it's nature. Nature's constantly throwing a new curveball at you. I mean, we are really suffering this summer under the heat.
Oh,
we don't have rain, and you have to adjust. But on the other hand, because we have been farming well, in the sense of rotational grazing and doing things like that, we're seeing that our grass has much deeper roots, so that when a time of less rain comes, our pastures still are doing better. It's very hard, but they're,
we have lots of grass, because when you stock for 12 months instead of for 8 or 9 months, so our stocking rate is calculated so that we can graze all the way through the winter. Well, the guys around here who feed hay in the winter and stock to consume all their grass by the middle of December are feeding hay right now, because we're in a drought and it's the middle of the summer. And it's really gratifying when, there are lots of things to go wrong for everybody. In farming, there are mistakes enough to go around so that everybody gets a big helping, right? But it is nice when something like that demonstrates how well it works. And in fact, isn't farming like that? It's really a question of understanding principles. I feel like this is the human condition. You need to know principles and then be ready for them not to work in the moment, right? It's like virtue, right? You're supposed to practice virtue, and sometimes practicing virtue will pay off, and sometimes it'll get you kicked right in the teeth. And when it gets you kicked in the teeth, you're supposed to go on practicing virtue, accepting that that is one of the reasonable outcomes. It makes me think of our friend Clint Finney. And if you're ever looking for very business-like grazing videos, look up Clint Finney. He's one of my favorite farmers to hobnob with, because he just is, he's all grass and no nonsense. And Clint Finney says, if you ask him if he raises sheep, and he says, I don't know, I'll go home and look in the pasture and see, because we all know the sheep get out all that, like if you're going to rotationally graze and you have sheep, that's exactly what you have to say is, I don't know, I'll go home and see. And that's a good place for farmers to be together.
Right.
Beth, can you dive in a little bit deeper about stocking? You were mentioning about stocking grass. Does that mean you're just the way that you're rotationally grazing it, that you're conserving the grass?
Right. A big part of rotational grazing that I think people don't keep in mind is stocking rates in the number of animals that you keep. So people would say on our 30 acres at the convent and then another 5 acres at home, they would say, oh, you could stock a lot more animals than that. But we don't, because what we're trying to stock to, our numbers, is how much food does our farm produce? How much grass does our farm produce? And if we go over that amount, then we're going to have to bring in hay or things like that. And we're trying very hard to keep our stocking rates lower than the amount of food that the farm provides, and not just seasonally, and which is again how a lot of people just assume that they're going to graze, is they're going to graze from April till
mid-December at the latest,
and then they're just going to go to hay. And we want to be able to put our animals on pasture all summer and all winter. So right around July and August, right around the time that we're at right now, Beth has to look at our grass and say, how many animals are we going to be able to keep through the winter? And it's a little bit hard to judge right now.
It's total guesswork because you don't know what the weather's going to do.
But especially now, since we haven't had rain. Normally we have rain and we're seeing the grass come back, but we haven't seen that. So we're kind of having to either say, we believe that we're going to get rains in August and September, and that's going to pull it back. Or we may need to get rid of some of the animals we've got.
This is a great topic. You said earlier, Tim and Sophie, that you wanted to hear sort of our backstory. And this topic of winter grazing kind of is a good segue to that, because can you hear the traffic going by, trucks roaring past? The road is actually a long way off, but I could hear that one, so I figured you could too. Somebody asked us recently how we met. And for the first time ever, it occurred to both of us that part of why we had married was each of us was the only person the other one knew who remotely might turn out to do what we do. We're both grandchildren of dry farmers in the Southwest. Our grandfathers, on whose farms we spent a good portion of our childhoods, were dry farmers, meaning there was no irrigation in the Southwest, in Texas and Oklahoma. And they raised families on just what the farm produced. This is back before there would have been a feed store. The most they would have had in the way of inputs might have been wheat midds, which is a milling byproduct from the local grain elevator.
But even before grocery stores as well. Someone was pointing that out recently.
Right. Long before grocery stores.
You know, it's one of the earliest grocery stores, I thought they were saying, was Safeway or something like that. I can't remember, Piggly Wiggly or something like that. Right. But this would even be before that. So if you didn't raise your own food, you didn't have food.
Or you bought it from the farmer, or the farmer brought it into town, sold it to the store.
But he could only raise so much.
Right.
So it was a time when if you didn't raise your food, you didn't eat. And that is so foreign to even think about something like that to our current culture.
I think it's important that some of the smartest, richest people in the world have overlooked that little detail, right? I think some of the smartest, richest people in the world who are accustomed to working with machines and numbers think that every problem is solvable. And I think they're in for a surprise. Mm-hmm. So we grew up with these grandfathers on farms, and farming was always in our picture of the world. And we wanted to farm, but as we got older, we did not want to farm the way we saw our neighbors farming. Big tractors. I think we were always aware, all our lives, the farm bill has been constructed. The original farm bill was to keep farmers in business, to keep them from going bankrupt, because a country that expects people to farm and raise its food needs to make sure those farmers don't go bankrupt just because prices crater sometimes. But in our lifetime, the Farm Bill has always been used to favor big farms over little farms. That's not speculation. That is, you can go right back and read the documentation of that starting in the 1940s, that is what the Farm Bill is for. And so we knew we didn't want to do that. I had read Little House in the Big Woods when I was at 8 years old. And I said to my mom, this is what I want to do when I grow up. And she said, basically, sorry, honey, you're about 100 years too late. And for whatever reason, I've always been stupid enough to think that you can live a dream.
Stubborn, maybe might be the better word.
to think that if you can't get your dream, you should fake it. So I'd been told reliably that I wasn't going to get my dream, and I wasn't willing to part with it. So I think that is a lot of why. I mean, we knew when we married that we were going to figure out a way for Shawn to be home as much as possible, and we were going to live in the country and raise our kids there growing food. And pretty much everything that happened after that was because those were our goals. Mm-hmm. So we homesteaded wherever we lived, gardens, chickens. We spent our summers on Shawn's parents' farm in western Oklahoma. And in 1996, we bought this place with no intention of staying because it didn't look like what our Southwest trained minds thought a farm was. I mean, this is steep land, mostly trees.
We're in a holler.
Rocks and clay and weeds, right? And we just wanted to go to town. At that point, we had a 9-year-old, 5-year-old, and 2 more after that. I remember how old everybody was. And we just wanted not to be in town. There were starting to be rough stuff at the park when the kids were over there. We were going to start seeing the culture seeping in, and we moved here. And in the course of trying to make it fun while we fixed the house up with garden and chickens and goats, we started to learn the possibilities of any piece of land. And when we talk about grazing through the winter, or never feeding grain, or not using bought inputs, it isn't that we think any other form of farming is not legitimate. There's lots of good ecological farming going on that includes the importation of nutrients, right, of calories in some form, and the exportation of some kind of product. And that's really valid. And, if God had somehow given us 100 clear acres somewhere, maybe that's what we'd be doing. But our call was always to figure out how do people interact with an ecosystem so that the ecosystem becomes ever more itself and feeds the people. That's the challenge. And it's really the challenge Adam and Eve were given, both before and after that, to live in a place and assist it in becoming so much itself that it produced people food too. And I can't think of anything more fun to do.
Well, Beth, I think both of you are in the Appalachias, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I heard you in one of our conversations talk about why the Appalachians was so special, especially for regenerative small farmers. And I think it would be great for you to, if you can reshare that, why the Appalachians is such
One of the things that I love about it is that we're not competing with the big farmers. It's not flat. So the big farmers do not have an interest in coming in here with their big tractors. And in fact, you couldn't even bring big tractors in on our property. It's that steep. So I love that it's not competitive with them. Some other things that we have come to know about Appalachia and things like that is that water comes from these hills. So there are springs and seeps throughout these hills where the water collects, and then it hits an impervious layer, and then it starts coming out, and you can catch that. And then you've got gravity all over the place because everything is going downhill somewhere. So if we can catch it high and then use it, we can move that water wherever we want the water. So there's all kinds of wonderful, they're not tricks, but it's just puzzle pieces that God's put into this world, that if you start to work with him instead of fighting him, instead of saying, I want my water here and I'm going to do it this way, instead you say, how did God provide water? How can I move water? That we have this wonderful...
Appalachia kind of gives you hints about treating creation respectfully. It's quirky. So Appalachia is really, it's a region that's defined differently by different people, but more or less it's the mountain range that runs from, you could say New York, you could say the Great Lakes, down into Georgia. And it's got an interesting history because it's steep and not easily exploited. It got bypassed. So as first the colonists and then the young Americans were settling up and moving further and further west, they kind of went around the Appalachian Mountains. And it was a good thing and it was a bad thing, because a bunch of immigrants from various places like Ireland and Scotland and Poland and Germany and Italy moved into those mountains and began farming. They began a hunter-gatherer / farming culture. And they lived on land to which they either had incomplete title or had no title. you can imagine how that would happen with land that that nobody was really interested in. You move in, you build a log cabin, you start hunting squirrels, and you plant some corn. There you are. It's your farm.
And it is hard for anyone to even run, for someone that has tools for defining land lines and stuff like that.
Oh, right. It would be difficult to survey it.
Yeah, very hard to survey.
So we
go from that rock to that tree to that,
right.
where it's flat, it's much easier to survey and stuff.
So in an entire indigenous culture, that indigeneity is an arguable thing, but it is sometimes defined as the people who desire to live in, who make the choices to live in a place and have their lives be an expression of that place. And so, with no disrespect to the Native Americans who were displaced, we'll still grant indigeneity to these settlers in Appalachia. And they were in a great place for it. Our particular part of Appalachia has the wonderful quality that in the last I don't even know what to call it, before the last ice age, when the planet was very warm, kind of like we're supposed to be going now, a lot of southern plant species migrated up into our neck of the woods. And with the last glaciation, the one that formed the Great Lakes, the glaciers came down to almost where we sit now, and then they receded. And what that means is where we are is in a band of Appalachia that is rich with southern species that weren't wiped out by the cold, and northern species that were carried down on that glacier. So by many accounts, the part of Appalachia we're in now has a level of biodiversity, as in represented by number of species, equivalent to that of an Amazonian rainforest. Yeah. And I can easily believe it. As we raise our eyes, we're sitting on our front porch, and as we raise our eyes, we're looking up a hollow that runs southwest, northeast. And it's almost impossible to see into it because there are so many trees, so many different species. But I know from climbing up and down those hills to clean the spring that they're covered with black cohosh and blue cohosh and wild ginger and hazel and just species after species of useful medicinal or food plants. It's rich with animals. So when we got here with our Texas and Oklahoma eyes, and we're sort of overwhelmed by the density of the plant life, we didn't realize at first what kind of a mecca we dropped into. And don't tell anybody because we like it just the way it is.
I think that's why we love it as well. It's something special about living in the Appalachians. And coming from Northern California, where we had droughts and fires, it's really nice.
Yeah, we followed the water. That was because of all the trauma and the PTSD from California and what they were doing to us. And we had a farm out there. We had 6 acres and we started farming. We brought our livestock and our ruminants in. And it was one thing for us to not have water, because growing up in California, the government would just shut off water. And that was a normal thing for us. But it wasn't until when we started farming that it became more dire, because our plants now were in the heat with no water, and so were our animals. And then it became more critical for us to go, okay, if we want to farm, we have to go find the water. And I started looking into the Appalachias and where we are, it's kind of like a tropical rainforest with the amount of water that we have. And
very beautiful.
It's beautiful.
It kind of feels like Hawaii. But what you were mentioning, Beth, is as a realtor, it has frustrated a lot of my clients because of the surveys. It's called meets and bounds, where it's from a rock to a tree.
Right.
And you just have to get along with your neighbors about that.
That's right. That's right.
The thing to remember about the old meets and bounds, I mean, we're describing right here some of the conditions that allowed America to be so insensate, so abusive. Sorry, I don't like that word, but still so unaware of and unpreserving of its land. With the surveying of the Northwest Territories, surveyors were sent out and they virtually laid a grid across the central and western United States, and land was sold sight unseen according to lines, imaginary lines figured out by a surveyor. And that meant that instead of land going from this tree to that rock to that stream, and people looking at a piece of land, reading that land for its potential. There's water here, there's creek bottom for pasture, there's higher ground for winter pasture, there's
garden spaces, there's orchards.
Those are sensible ways to lay out a farm. Instead of that, it was just a grid, drop down with no reference to what was actually being enclosed in that. When I said our grandfathers were dry farmers, the Homesteading Act, one of the versions of that, as they got to the Southwest, was to more or less admit that a quarter section of land out there simply, because it's just laid down like a grid, a lot of those farms did not have a lot of those quarter sections did not have the potential to make a farm. There just wasn't enough good land there. And so in the dry farm areas, the Homesteading Act would actually give you 2 quarter sections in the hopes that somehow you'd get enough water in there, enough decent land that you can farm on it. And here, this land, we're on land that's laid out. It's not a grid, but it was surveyed, completely careless of what was inside of it. And we've had to struggle to figure out.
Well, ours has been really that, this was a much bigger farm and all the good pieces were carved out. And this was the junk that was left.
Oh, no. Well, that leads me to my next question. And who deemed it unsuitable for agriculture? And my follow-up question is, both of you came from dry farming families. So what was it like to adapt then to this Amazonian Appalachia environment for farming?
Yeah, I don't know how it got zoned, except that when you hear the history of it, there was a road, the county road used to run right through our holler. So it was, a terrible and then very steep. And I mean, anybody who just looked at it would say, this isn't really agricultural land. And so when we were looking for a place to buy, prices were high.
Not compared to now.
No, but we're trying to find something that we didn't want to use all of our money to buy land, because we knew we were going to want to put money into the land. And so we were looking and looking, and we actually found a place that we fell in love with. That was 30 acres, and it was
54.
Okay. It was an old stagecoach inn. It was very, very neat.
On a beautiful small river.
We had offered, and they had counter offered, and we were going to counter offer again. And our real estate agent said to us, my wife's sick. Do you mind if I wait until after the weekend
to put in your offer?
And we said, no problem at all. And he got back to us on Monday and said, it's been sold. We had no idea that anybody else was looking at it.
We had actually found the piece of property, searched out who owned it, tracked them down, and sent our own real estate agent to ask them to sell it. So as far as we knew, ours was the only hat in the ring.
And we were devastated. And then a friend of ours said, well, there's this place that's 24 or 17.
It was 17 at the time.
17 acres and a house for $11,000. It was in the
it was in like the local cheap classifieds.
Right. And we thought, we know what that looks like. There is no way we're interested in that. But they kept saying, go look at it. And finally, we had gone back to Oklahoma. We came back and they said, well, did you look at it? And we said, no, we're really not interested in it. She said, just go look at it. So we called the guy up and we said, we're interested in seeing it. And he said, well, if the door's open, could you close it on the way out? And the door was indeed open.
And this was in January. If the door's standing open, will you pull it shut?
And the place was a disaster. The floors were falling in. It was the people who had lived in it since the last owner had got it on the land contract, and they had just
made one payment and then quit making payments. But they
had dogs and it was just really awful.
Subhuman. Think Armageddon, and you're pretty close.
So why in the world we chose that, except that it was very cheap, and we also knew we had. I knew that it had streams, it had water, it had woods, and it had rocks.
We knew it'd be fun. We had 4 sons at that point. We thought, well, we'll enjoy it for a while, but we'll still need to buy a farm.
Yeah, but we'll flip the house, and then we will find a real farm. And in the meantime, we started doing what we would do is,
do what we did everywhere, wherever we lived. We
brought
put
in
gardens,
some goats
bought
and
some
put
chickens.
in some gardens and stuff like that. And it started to inform us that we are a farm, and I am a farm that needs someone to take care of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we did, is we started taking care of it, and we started saying, what could it give to us? And it was,
I think one big difference for us. So we had both, Shawn's family farm was actually both of our family farms actually were pretty interesting. I grew up on a farm too, in west of Houston, and it was just flat, hot, square, no trees, with cows in it, and a water tank for them to drink from. And in fact, it was a bunch of places just like that. It was a fairly big farm, and all of the pastures were pretty much like that. But both our grandfathers had waterways and trees, and we had grown up with some variety in the landscape of those farms. And when we got here, it was all of that crammed into. Appalachia is very tightly folded. The hills are steep, the hollers are narrow, so everything is sort of mushed into a small place. Looking back now, we often think of what our architect son Thomas says, and he explores this in his work with his online work is called Inner Block. It's inner block in square brackets to show you that he's talking about very small human scale spaces. And he comes into Appalachia and he says this whole place is a series of human scale rooms. And that is how Appalachia feels. When I would walk out my door when I was a kid, I was in the middle of a huge flat prairie, and anybody who was within 5 miles, if they were looking in the right direction, could see me and I could see them. And the sun blazed down all day long. Here, you're constantly moving from a defined space, like the tight space between the barn and the chicken house and the garden, and it has a whole character to it. Then you move from that, this just describing our farm, down across Jeddo's Run, and you turn left along the right of way, and you're sort of hemmed in on one side by trees, on another side by hill, and then you go through the barnyard gate and it opens out and you're in the barnyard. Every little space has its own qualities and its own character.
And its own microclimate.
Yeah, that's true too.
One of the things that we really, if we're very hot up at the house, all we have to do is walk down to the creek, and you feel like you're an air conditioner. I mean, it's just fabulous. And these were things that we did not have the experience of in Texas and Oklahoma as much. And I really do believe that God put us here.
I do too.
That this is,
this land has made our family who we are.
That's right.
And I think everywhere, that's the case, right up into the Industrial Revolution and the urbanization of humanity.
When our house burned down, we would get enough money from the insurance that we could have left and gone somewhere else and gotten a farm that was more like a farm. And we said, no, this is our place. And again, such a wonderful thing, because our sons all kind of came around, the architect and the general contractor and the mason, and they said, we're going to rebuild this house. And what they are doing with our house is phenomenal. It's the same footprint. It's the same
house. It's more or less the same layout.
But it's
enshrining, it's enacting the way we use the old house without all the obstacles and jury-rigged things. So instead of going down the railroad tie steps to the back door, which constantly had to be replaced as they rotted, right? And going in through a very low squeezed back door into a low ceilinged basement that had been jury-rigged into a dairy space. Now we have, properly built stairs that aren't too steep, and a nice big back door. And then we go into a well-lighted, high-ceilinged, beautiful space for processing milk.
Yeah, the boys really said we need to be very thoughtful about all of our choices. And they've done wonderful things. And they also have skills that none of us had at the beginning. So the whole bottom floor is timber frame. We couldn't have done that. And then a lot of it is this beautiful masonry work, which again, our son spent a year in Oklahoma learning how to be a mason. So he was able to bring those skills in, and it's really just a remarkable, and we could never have afforded
No.
at our age to tear the house down and rebuild it. And we had the great, God really provided that for
we're
us.
so grateful for that privilege. Tim, you asked how did we adjust to all the water? And that was a really good question, because we were here for 5 years before we bought the house, and no, 6 years. And it was a while when we first got here. It was overcast a lot. This area, usually, not this summer, has the same number of cloudy days as Seattle. There was a lot of rain. We weren't used to it. The land lay wet some of the time. But by 1995, we looked at each other. We'd been trying to move back to Texas and Oklahoma, and we were struggling because we knew one good reason to stay was that in both Texas and Oklahoma, finding a community to live in where people lived close enough that they could actually act like community. It wasn't an hour drive to everybody's house, and a community of people of our own faith. And we all, as we pass on our faith to our children, we need to be remembering that it isn't enough that our families uphold their tradition if nobody else does. Because at some point, your children are going to enter the bigger world. And if they have to decide, is the world crazy or my parents are crazy, you don't know which way that one's going to fall, at least when they're teenagers making choices. We wanted our kids to grow up in a place where they could go to, so we're Catholic, they could go to daily mass, pray a family rosary, be homeschooled, and be 16 before they figured out that's weird. Because everybody around here, like that's not weird around here. But the other reason we stayed was that from 1990 to practically the present, Texas and Oklahoma have been in one long drought. And we looked at each other in 1995 and we said, home, we have to deal with the drought, and we'll have to pump every drop of water we get from the aquifer. And here, water falls out of the sky.
And out of the rock.
And comes out of the rock. And we're in the middle of a drought. The farm, this part of the farm is supplied with water by a very small spring that at this time of year runs at the rate of 2 minutes per gallon. Not 2 gallons per minute, 2 minutes per gallon. But it has never stopped.
Yeah.
So we directed into an 1,800-gallon cistern, and we use waterless toilets. And between those two things, we never have. The only time we ever have a problem with house water is if I forget to check the spring, because it's a spring. I have to go up and clean the intake every so often. And if I forget, then every once in a while, somebody will say we're out of water, and I'll have to go clean the intake.
Your story is just so inspiring. I love that you were just talking a little bit about how your house is being rebuilt and how your children, your sons have gotten into trade. So you did something right where they grew up on a farm and they didn't take off to the cities, but they're actually all part of the family business now. And it's so beautiful. And I love that, Shawn, you mentioned how you guys chose like one of the most undesirable properties to start your farm and just, create the story. And I work with so many clients that have this long spreadsheet of a checklist of like what they're looking for, as if if you check off all these boxes, that's going to make homesteading that much more easier. And it may help in making it easier, but it's all part of the story and it's all part of the journey. And you guys, it's just been so inspiring.
Yeah, and I would say even more than that, it's a part of the adventure. One of the things that we speak now all over the country, and it was recently that we realized that the reason that we're able to speak, that we have something to say, is because of the trials of buying a lousy farm and buying a lousy house and doing all the work ourselves, instead of saying, we'll hire this in. If I could just make enough money, then all of our problems will be solved, because then we can have people that will solve all of our problems. But instead we said, we always want to have more time than money, so that when we have a problem, the family's going to solve the problem. When we need, if our house is too small and we need to add on to the house, the family, we're going to figure out how to do that. We're going to figure out how to do concrete work. We're going to figure out how to do all those kinds of things. So our whole life as a family has been that, looking at a challenge and saying, how can we solve that? And then that, we had always been providing food, but then it really was, so how can we do the same thing with food, in the sense of, how can this farm provide all the food that we need?
And more significantly, at least among homesteaders, all the feed.
Right.
It's sort of a juggling exercise to figure out how to provide all your food if you ignore the question of animal feeds, right? You think, okay, I'm going to keep, chickens, and I'll buy Purina Gallina for them, and I'm going to keep pigs, and I'll buy pig pellets. And then you just do all your chores and clean all your stalls, and you can make dinner and say, voila, we grew almost everything on the table. But when you add to that mix, no, the farm, we just had this conviction. Farms are places where food comes from, not food places that you have to, you should never have to buy an input to manage a subsistence farm. When you are buying inputs, it can be a great choice in a business, right? I'm going to raise pastured broilers. I'm going to have to buy feed to do that. But since I'm going to sell my pastured broilers for $30 a piece, and I'm only going to have $6 worth of feed in them, it's a pretty good exchange. Mm-hmm. But for our subsistence, for whatever reason, we always knew that it wasn't going to be okay to rely on anything coming in from outside. And we weren't ever in what do you call it when people like build a stockade and fortress mentality. We weren't ever fortress mentality about it. It was more that we knew that was how things really work.
And every time I saw food, I saw $1 going off the farm, that meant $1 that I had to provide, because I was the primary breadwinner.
No, you're the only breadwinner.
And Beth,
I'm worth exactly 2 cents on the open market.
No, Beth was the family, the primary farmer. She really managed things here, and then I brought in the cash that we needed. And our whole process has been, I want to be more on farm. How can we spend less and need less so that I can work less off farm? Mm-hmm. And that's been our economic journey as well, as how can we do that? And we're to that stage now that we do have an Airbnb on the farm, which we're currently, the house is built. But between the Airbnb and then our speaking, it pretty much covers our bills, because our bills are so small.
Mm-hmm. Well, it has to do with needs.
Yes.
For whatever reason, that was always a goal for us, to have more time than money. Mm-hmm. And to, the problem with the money game is that there's no obvious end to it, right? Bill Gates is still trying to make more money than he already makes, right? You don't even have to pile it up put it under your mattress and hire a guard, because it's just numbers on a screen somewhere. And we never liked that game. We always knew that if it mattered to you, you would always be the loser, because only one person is going to be the richest man in the world. But what mattered to us was time together, time with our kids, time in the dirt, good food.
And that was something when people hear that our house caught fire, they're immediately, oh my gosh, how terrible. And really, most everything that we had came from Goodwill and from Salvation Army and from places like that, or from garage sales, so there wasn't a lot.
He's talking about my gently used young antiques. I don't know what it means.
So there wasn't a lot of, heartfelt, oh my gosh, that was my favorite bed in the world. No, you just go and get another bed. You know, these were not heirlooms. So that losing those things was, you know, there's a comfort in those things, because these are the things that we've been living with for a long time, but it didn't rock our boats a whole lot.
I love that. I think I would argue to say that time is more valuable than money, because it's not something that you can buy and purchase more time. You can't make, Bill Gates doesn't have 25 hours in the day. He can't make that happen for him. And so
and Bill Gates could never eat as well as we do. I mean, we eat better than anybody else I know.
Except for other farmers who do what we do.
Right.
You know, those of us who grow our own food, there's just, especially as you establish a pasture and you're managing animals well on a really biodiverse pasture, the food is just so good. You take the first bite and then you just put your hands in your lap and sit there for a minute, just absorbing how good it is.
Yes, we're ruined. I mean,
I know.
That's right.
We're city folk through and through. But now when we go back to the cities, you know, when we're speaking or to visit, we visit all of our old places that I used to love eating in the Bay Area. And I'm like, it doesn't taste good.
Sorry, Sophie, you're ruined.
I'm ruined. And I'm like, well, it can't be that they changed management or the chef, because there's still lines out the door for people to come eat. So I'm like, this food must still taste good to some people, to a lot of people. But for some reason, it doesn't hit it anymore. And
they don't have the ingredients that we have.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be cooked in this remarkable way when you're starting with ingredients that are that good.
Exactly. It really is just salt and pepper that you really need, and you have to start with the ingredients.
So good.
Yeah.
It is so good. So going back, you were talking about having this closed loop system and how to manage a farm without having to put other inputs inside. Can you share some insights on how you've managed to create a closed loop system on your farm where the animals feed the soil in turn, which in turn feeds the plants and the animals?
The key for us that we feel like, and we feel like this is God's pattern. We feel like that God created this pattern. And it's interesting because Wendell Berry doesn't use the word pattern. He uses a different word, and it's a better word than pattern, but it is more or less same thing. I wish I could remember what the word is that he uses. But grass is going to grow up. I mean, the sun comes down, and the sun, all of the grass, all the greens, all those things are the solar collectors. We think we're so clever with our solar cells, but God created a whole world that is full of solar collectors. And the problem with all of our wonderful solar collectors when we're in the grass and stuff is that we can't eat them. But he then gave us this wonderful set of animals, the ruminants, that can eat them and turn them into food. And then we can get either a one-time harvest, we can either butcher those animals, or we can get the twice daily harvest of the best food that there is in the world, which feeds us and feeds everything else on the farm. Feeds the chickens, it feeds the cats.
When you stop and think about dairy, you realize most of the things we eat, God didn't invent just to make food, right? Like apples are means for an apple tree to get its seeds transported somewhere else. But milk is food. That's all it is. It's just food. And when he gives us an animal that can transform,
it's like manna.
Cellulose, that's right. Cellulose into, so cellulose. Let's talk about this for a minute. This is a very, very basic complex carbohydrate that we cannot digest. We cannot access the chemical energy in cellulose in our guts. Can't be done. Most animals can't. Pigs can't, chickens can't. I'm not sure. Geese can't. I'm not sure what they're doing when they eat grass. Ruminants can do it. They can get, and it's 90% of the energy, the solar energy being captured in a leaf is cellulose. For us to get at it, he's given us ruminants. And if you look back along the history of humanity, you realize that, oh yeah, virtually every, not quite every, but virtually every culture has had a very large component, sometimes the major component in that culture has been some sort of a relationship with a ruminant that's out there turning cellulose into a non-food complex carbohydrate into proteins, fats, and sugars, the three sources of food that we most need.
When God told Abraham, I'm going to take you to this wonderful land, it was a land flowing with milk and honey. And that's where he went. And then he had so many herds that he had to divide them up, and they had to be managed well. And so the key to this, to making the homestead work, is bringing the dairy cow to the farm and milking it twice a day, but then managing it. And this is what God said to us. Yeah, managing the cow in the pasture. This is what God said to us at the garden, is that it wasn't just that there's going to be this unlimited amount of food. You have to manage it. You have to be in charge of it. And so what happens with the ruminant is the ruminant needs to be managed in a biomimicry way, so that we are trying to do on our small pasture what those ruminants would do in nature when they're just turned loose, which is to eat, stomp where they are, and then move on. And so we mimic that in our farm. And what we find is that we get this incredible abundance of food, and the pastures get better. So here's God setting up a pattern for great success. And if we just follow that pattern, and unfortunately, man is so clever that he finds ways where he doesn't have to do this, or that he thinks, well, if I just put all the animals in one giant lot and then I bring the food to them, won't this be easier? I don't think it's easier in any event. And it's definitely not as successful as following God's natural patterns.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sophie.
I love that. I'm looking at your book right now, The Independent Farmstead, and you write about growing soil, biodiversity, and nutrient-dense food with grass-fed animals and intensive pasture management. And the image here is of your farm. Is that right?
That's right. It is. Yeah.
That's just so beautiful.
Yeah. So, and it works. And that's what our goal, our evangelization. We love to talk about Jesus. We think Jesus is wonderful, but we also really love to talk about how everyone, if we had a million of these little farms all over this country would be a whole different place if we had this. And that's what we long for, is that kind of thing happening in our country, because it would transform our country.
It's funny for us to remember too, like, so we married in 86, and 10 years later, or not quite 10 years later, we had homesteaded in every ridiculous urban setting you can think of, spent our summers on the family farm. And here we were in Appalachia, and we bought this place that did not seem to fit our dreams. Mm-hmm. And we began playing with it, right? We expected it to feed us. And at that point, we'd been frustrated for 10 years because every instruction manual we could find for keeping chickens said basically build them a house and feed them bought feed. Or worse yet, mix your own from bought ingredients. And it wasn't answering our dream. It wasn't so much that we had an intellectual conviction that, of course, animals and plants can sustain one another. We just didn't like it. It didn't fit our dream. Well, on this land, we spent, a bunch of years stumbling in the dark and figuring out who eats what and how you direct nutrients so that you don't need to buy feed.
Nutrients that are already on the farm.
Nutrients are already there. And so, roughly speaking, we started milking goats in 97. We started milking cows in like 2000 or maybe 2001. And in 2010, we had already been rotational grazing without knowing what we were doing. But in 2010, we were introduced to the principles and the possibilities. And we were so thrilled. We had cracked the nut. We had the thing in the bag. We had figured out sunlight, pasture, good grazing, milk the cow, everybody gets fed. And we wanted to tell people
and it was
about
free.
it.
That was what we
And
loved.
it's free.
It was free.
And it works. It's like a beautiful big dance or puzzle or circus that you manage, and all this life happens and beauty happens around you, and the soil gets deeper, and there are more flowers and more fruit and more animals, and it's beautiful. And we wanted to tell people about it. We went to, I think in 2010, maybe, somebody took us to the second Mother Earth News Fair. So they started in Seven Springs, Pennsylvania, which is only 2 hours from us. And we thought, hooray, we're going to go learn from all these people with all their information. And we went. And about noon, we sat down at a picnic table in the middle of beautiful Seven Springs, and we looked at each other and said, we're 15 years ahead of these people. Like, this is all 101 level, or its goals were totally different.
The goals were totally different. It was, how can I turn my farm into money? Or how can I raise...
How can I grow microgreens and sell them in New York City?
Or how can I get kombucha?
Or how can I make kombucha and sell it? Right. And so the next year, we went home and we sent Mother Earth News a proposal to teach at the next one. We wanted to we learned what we really thought. Some friends of ours, not friends, acquaintances of ours, had been interested in homesteading, and the wife just about had the husband talked into it, right? And she had him sit down and watch a homesteading. This must have been early in the video world, and he sat there watching what seemed to him a very attractive farm until milking time came, and the guy rolled out a milking machine, and Brian apparently brought his fist down on the table and said, see, you have to have $1 million to play this kind of game. And that was the end of their homesteading dream. And so in 2010, 2011, as we were speaking, what we wanted was to be able to share this pattern with people so they wouldn't give up, so they wouldn't say, you got to have $1 million to do this. We knew that we had spent however many years it was at that point painfully learning without a guidebook, groping in the dark, and we had found things that we wanted to really share with other people so that they would be able to successfully homestead too. So we began speaking. It was funny because it was a lot like, if you're a Christian, you're trying to sort of gradually work Jesus into the conversation. It was a lot like that, because if you wanted to talk to homesteaders in 2010, you did not start with a dairy cow. Everybody knew they didn't want a dairy cow. That wasn't on anybody's radar. We're not doing that. So we explain how things worked really well, and there's this secret ingredient, and then we'd sneak in the cow.
It's hard to sneak in a cow.
It's hard to sneak a cow in. And there was a lot of sales resistance. But we kept doing it. And in 2014, Chelsea Green gave us a contract for a book. And so we knew Shawn, in that year, he looked at me, he heard something on the radio about rotational grazing on NPR. And he was like, can you believe this is on the radio? Like, maybe, he said, what he actually did was he turned to me in the car and he said, Elizabeth, I think we're cutting edge. And even then, we're still struggling to get people to listen. What's fascinating to us is that the pattern of sunlight, leaves, cellulose, which is not accessible, it's all we have to power the planet with, and we can't digest it. But if we'll partner with ruminants and soil microbes and native plants, suddenly this must have been how Copernicus and Galileo felt about their discoveries. Like, all the pieces suddenly fall into place, and we realize this is the right pattern. And you can tell because it is both elegant, it's elegant, simple, and beautiful. And those are tests for a good scientific theory. And they're how I would describe good farming.
And one of the things that is distressing is that on the other side, on this is a balancing act in a certain sense. And on the other side is this thing called convenience, because farming is not convenient. Living this way is not convenient. And Walmart is exceptional at selling convenience. They don't sell anything. They don't sell anything. Most of what they sell is not not nutritional. It's not healthy. It doesn't work right. It's cheap. It breaks. But what people are willing to settle for but it's convenient. And so convenient, I'll even bring this to your door. And it's very, very hard to convince people that convenience is not better than the nutrition, the goodness that we get. Right.
Now, when we met you early in this trip, about 2018, the national zeitgeist suddenly had homesteading on its radar. Suddenly, we went from those crazy people who, and you know what we're really grateful to is Amy Fuel. Amy Fuel put her finger on the exact moment in time when America's Christians were suddenly going to be hungry for homesteading information. And she was not, it's fun and it's beautiful and it's popular. So it could be just a lot of people split their interest in homesteading between homesteading and say working up a following and making a I don't even know what you call them anymore, more website, podcast, YouTube channel, something, so that they can make their money that way. And so they sort of split their interest. I want a homestead, but I want my homesteading to be really attractive so that people watch me and I make money. And Amy just didn't do that. Even though you can see that she was looking to get speakers who would bring in a crowd, she was always looking for skills. She was looking for seniority in some sense, like a history of skills. And America's just changed since before COVID. Christians in America suddenly haven't. We don't have to trick people into hearing about dairy cows anymore. And when we speak and we say, does anybody in the room have a dairy cow? A whole lot of hands go up. And that's super, super exciting for people like us. You asked about our journey, Tim, and it's been fun to suddenly have so many people to share with.
I think another thing that is changing, which I really love, is that culturally, I think the Christians and many people are beginning to be more independent. I just happened to see on the news today that it said in 2/3 of the states, all of the states are either high or very high with COVID-19. Who cares? People are not panicking. People are not doing any of the things that we were doing before. And we have this high incident of COVID-19. And I think people are beginning to, I know, people are beginning to see that we can be independent of that we don't have to be afraid of that we are, it's culturally, I do think that the homesteading movement is having some impact.
Well, and if we're going to go there, I think we need to, I mean, if we're going to admit that into the conversation, I think we need to have that impact.
Yeah.
The present moment in history is an anomaly which has never before occurred. It is just weird. In the developed world, most people live far from their sources of everything, not just food. Everything's shipped to the long distance. They have few or no survival skills. And that's not tenable. It's one way or another, that particular bubble will burst. And a whole lot of people are going to be in trouble.
For us,
Say it again.
For us, 2020 or COVID-19 really woke us up to everything. But I do want to say that there is hope, because we were also the ones that were convenient led. Like I had Whole Foods deliver all of our food to our home. And now, 4 years later, we have snuck that dairy cow into our farm now.
Yes, there you
That's
go.
right.
And what we love is that when we say go down to the grocery store and get your green, and go down to the garden and go get the green beans and all the things that we're going to eat for tonight's meal.
One thing that I don't think I quite realized until the house burned down, we had to redesign the kitchen. And I guess I noticed it because we're in the B&B, so I think about this kitchen more. It's less convenient. There's almost no food in our kitchen. Like if you walked into my kitchen, there's a refrigerator, and our friends, the Covingtons, always say people keep refrigerators for two things: leftovers and condiments, and they're right. So there is a refrigerator with leftovers and condiments in it, and there's a spice cabinet, and then there are jars that have things like seeds. There's a bucket of wheat and a bucket of molasses, and then outside there's milk in the other refrigerator. But that's it, because everything we eat is running around outside or it's growing outside and we have to go pick it. There is the exception. We do keep freezers. We do have 2 freezers with meat in them.
And we have a lot of food in the root cellar. And
right. But
and in the can downstairs and stuff like that.
I don't can very much, but
right.
Right. The food is there, but it's not in my kitchen. It's either in storage or it's still alive. This sort of gives me the opportunity to go to a place that I'm enjoying thinking about right now, which is this off-grid question. A couple of years ago, we met Josh Thomas of School of Traditional Skills. And in the course of that first conversation, he said, we've got to stop these, homesteader wannabes from thinking they all have to be off-grid before they're homesteaders. And I said, homesteaders think they have to be off-grid to be homesteaders? Like, when did that happen? The off-grid question is such a funny one, because if you were suddenly cut off, right, from all your inputs, you're not going to die because you don't have electricity. You'll die because you don't have water, or you'll die because you don't have food, but you're not going to die without electricity. So the grid question is it's a funny metric to use for independence. I've started to ask myself which grid, right? Can you hear? We have a house friend setting up a racket over there on the porch rail. Go away, bird. Which grid? Are we talking about the petrochemical grid, the highway grid, the grocery store grid, the medical grid? Those are the grids that the homesteaders of today need to be looking at and figuring out solutions to.
We just gave a talk at an Amish conference, and the talk was on home everything. And we were talking about how our medical system, we've been gradually working further and further away from the medical system to now we barter with our local doctor.
And we use his services about twice a year at the moment.
That's right. But he then uses us. We do AI for him, or we help him out with
AI in homesteader language means artificial insemination, not artificial intelligence. Just so the listeners know.
Yeah, but the education system, all of those things, moved more and more toward home. And as they moved more and more toward home, they became more and more specific to us.
That's right.
So, when you start homeschooling, you start thinking, oh, well, I've got to, your goals are that my children will do really well. They'll be able to go to Yale.
You try to recreate what's going on off farm on the farm.
But then you begin to step back from it and say, look, I don't even care if my kids go to college or not. That's really not that important. What I really want my kids to be educated for is that they go to heaven. So if that's my goal, that my children, that when we all die, we're all together in heaven. That's a very different schooling system than the schooling system of the public schools, certainly. But even where a lot of homeschoolers might be is let's really think about what our focus should be. And over again, we were moving toward, and that's what we were talking about with the Amish, was moving toward a whole new set of goals. not trying to raise food to sell off farm and make money, but raise food because it's the best way to
I think what you're talking
feed
about,
my children. And
I think what you're talking about is just like what we were doing when we came onto a farm. We wanted to get to first causes.
yes,
We wanted to say, no, like Purina bought corn and soybeans, any kind of purchased input, those are all substitutes for something else. And we want to know what the something else is. So we were attempting to engage in our lives first principles. And that's where the homesteading movement came from too. It was a bunch of parents saying, if I really believe in the things that I say I believe, then it is of the first importance that I take personal responsibility for my children, for their upbringing, their education, their moral formation. If I really believe the things I say I believe, I will act like it. And I think maybe that's the energy behind the Christian homesteading movement in the last 5 years, is a whole lot of people. You know how that is. We all know, if we're not one, we know one. A convert who says, basically, I suddenly realized that I was building my life around a bunch of not important stuff. And I turned to Jesus and realized what was important. And now I want to live for him. And I think the Christian homesteading movement has a real relation to that it's a bunch of people. In fact, I'm sure of it because we hear it all the time. And I'm sure you do too. The people who say, 2019, God told me to move to the country and work with my family and grow food and make a good life. And that's people living what they really believe.
And these are people coming from, as you are, from California. They're coming from all over the place.
Fun people.
And
fun
they
stories.
they don't know how to do this. And
their hands are white and soft and they have no tan. And by golly, they're going to get out there and do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I am so impressed with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was us. That was 2019. That was 2020. 2019, I told Tim, like, I really felt God telling us to prepare, specifically around food. And I thought it was really silly at that time because I couldn't even keep a succulent alive. And 2019, he said, okay, well, it was so loud, the voices, the voice was so loud for me that I said, okay. And Tim said, well, then put some garden beds together. And so by March 2020, when California shut down, we already had our 4 garden beds full of food. And I thought, was this what I was supposed to prepare for? Because I did not know in 2019 what was going to happen in just a couple of months. So that's really incredible.
I had to ramp up too really quickly because we didn't have those skill sets, and my hands are not soft because I have eczema, but they're
But that's right. So many people come to this, they don't have the skill set, they're intimidated by it. And what we need to be telling them is, this is so doable.
You'll learn.
That's right.
Do it and you'll learn.
You'll just jump in. When I write in a book, I always write farm with reckless abandon. Just jump in, figure it out. You'll get this. It's a really exciting.
God's pattern.
That's right. Using God's pattern. That's right.
Here's the caveat, and we're not any of us going to be good at it at the beginning, but it's what we have to be doing. Is God made this planet. It's his. He put us here to take care of it. So our plans need to be his plans.
Yeah.
When we want to know how to take care of something, we need to look to his patterns to show us how to do it. And we've gotten to where we are. I mean, the human race has gotten into this pickle by not honoring the nature, first of all, of other people, because the laying down of masses of wealth is either a way of disrespecting stuff, piling it up just so you have the pleasure of ownership, or more often a way of not helping your neighbor. In the big biblical picture, We're not supposed to pick up our gleanings. They're supposed to stay on the ground for the poor people. We're supposed always to make provision for others. So technology has let us think that we can all be rich, but only at the expense of trashing the world. And as we reel that one back, we're going to have to relearn what our our most recent ancestors forgot, which is we didn't make this planet. It has a nature, and every single atom of it belongs to God and is held in being by him. So when we use it, it should be with love and excitement and fear and trembling. It's not ours, but we have this. I was going to ask you, you said you heard that voice in 2019 and you responded to it. Is it terribly exciting to feel yourself responding to the Holy Spirit in that way?
It was amazing. I didn't know how much it was going to change our lives. And leading into that, because we were actually in 2019, we were at the top of our career, top of our business. We were with a top mortgage broker, and we were flying all over thinking, oh yeah, this is it. This is it. You know, this is the breakthrough. And then it was just like a nagging voice, which was the Holy Spirit, and saying, prepare, prepare, prepare. And I can still hear it to this day. And after writing the book and seeing how well the book has been received and all the people who have responded to it well, I keep thinking like this was also the project that I had put away to the side for the last 12 years. And I didn't lean into that either. And so now I'm like, okay, wherever the Holy Spirit, wherever God wants to use us, we are on this mission, because clearly he has this perfect plan that I just kept snuffing away because of all of the expectations of, how we should be living our lives and what success is defined as because of our parents' expectations and what we want our children. But we have abandoned everything recklessly.
Yeah.
That sounds to me like the most exciting of adventure stories and love stories. And you've just described what it is to homestead too. Like to homestead ecologically in a place is to lean into that receptivity to, Shawn was talking about finding water and then leading the water using gravity, taking it different places. There's something so exciting about feeling God speak to you, feeling the land speak to you. In the end, you feel your animals speak to you. I have two friends, they're sisters. They were describing to me recently, because they both, the people who don't diaper from infancy, they just attune to their child's needs to eliminate, right? And they put them on the potty. And one of them has a 6-year-old and she has 4 babies, and they've all been trained in this way. So she's got a lot of, she's got a lot of history with this. And I asked them both, so how do you know? And they looked at each other and said, I don't know. You just do. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you. I can't say, oh, the baby does this. You just know. And that's how our farms are. We respond to our land, our climate, our animals, our plants, and eventually, hopefully, to our children. And then some morning we wake up and we think, oh, those voices have all been God's voice, telling me how to love and respect his creation.
And then you have this wonderful experience of your house burning down. and what happens is everything, all the things that you've been doing kind of come around, and they kind of pull together, and most of us don't have that kind of real affirmation of knowing that this is the culmination of what we've been doing. All of these things are coming together, and they worked, because we don't know that. We're constantly, did it work? Did we do the right thing? I don't know. But then that's what I look at this house as. It's why I'm so excited about it, is I see it as this wonderful affirmation of
I think
our life choices.
I think when the house burned down, we realized that God had grabbed the wheel.
Yeah, right.
And that's a funny feeling. It's an exciting feeling. It is not without, I mean, we had essentially rebuilt that home. We lived in it 29 years. We'd raised, of our 8 children, 5 had been born into that house. Many of them, most of them had been physically born in the house. And it's kind of a scary thing, but it's also a hugely exciting thing. I heard somebody speaking on on a screen a week or so ago. And he said, can you feel this? It was a big national speaker. He was talking about our present political situation, actually. But he had a big grin on his face, and he said, can you feel this? God is in this. And I think there are a whole lot of homesteaders across the country who are having exactly that experience, your experience, our experience with the fire of, I thought my life was laid out along sort of school and job lines, and I was going to, sort of walk the path laid out for me by a culture I didn't make and haven't really thought critically about. And suddenly I'm not. Suddenly,
yeah,
adventure beckons, risk beckons, and even the risk is exciting. That's where we are.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful story, and I love how you guys described it. It's a beautiful adventure that neither one of our families could have scripted. And
no, that's right.
It was all God. And the fruits of the labor is, the absolute most nutritious food ever. And I love that both of us want to share it with other people, and just so that they can experience it too, and how you both are giving back and speaking, to help train others so that they can gain the skill sets. And what you mentioned, Shawn, earlier was, I also share that same dream of having more small farms pop up in the US doing what we do, right? Doing farming the right way. So, I mean, Sophie and I, we're so appreciative of all the referrals you've given us as well, because we can all work together to help make this dream become a reality for others.
Right. Everybody working together. I mean, one of the things that we love is when somebody has a new problem that we don't have. So they're buying an area that has been row cropped for years and years and years with glyphosate and all that kind of stuff. And they start exploring, well, here's what we're trying, here's what we're doing. That is so much fun, because and all of that information needs to be shared, because there's going to be more and more land like out there that it needs to be taken care of. And we need to have people saying, well, here's what I did. We've got a couple in West Virginia that are taking strip mined land. I mean, totally strip mined land, and they are regenerating it. And it is so exciting to watch that happen, because we all need to find our little piece of land. It's probably going to be in really bad shape.
Especially these days, who can afford good land anymore?
And we need to say, this is going to be my farm, and I'm going to turn this into this wonderful thing that's going to go to my children and my children's children. And every year it will be better, not degraded. Every year it will be thicker, richer, more abundant.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of our mutual, I guess, clients had taken a class at your farm.
Okay.
They came down to East Tennessee, and Beth, you had given them my information.
Yeah. And
it's such a small world, but I feel like we definitely feel honored to be on this mission with you.
Right.
Oh, yeah. And Tim found them a property just 15 minutes away from us.
Oh, that's so fabulous.
Recently told us the story about how they brought in their first dairy farm, and you both were there when the
I remember. I know we're not saying a name, but at any rate, I know who you mean. I was just thinking about them today, and it's so much fun to work with people who are just starting out, because of course they're full of potential, but what you're seeing initially is their history. You're seeing somebody whose entire history is something else. And we've actually done this an amazing number of times with people our age or older, which is always a little spooky
Mhm.
because you think, okay, I can help you start this, but are you sure you're up for this?
Yeah.
And it's working.
Yeah.
These people are amazing. So when you first meet them, you meet somebody with a history and no future yet of farming, and then you see their farming future just explode on them.
Yeah.
And it's so much fun. I mean, explode in a good way, just
Right.
with life on them, and it's really
Right.
beautiful.
We just had somebody visit the farm. His parents were from Vietnam, came over, and they had done a giant chicken farm. They had
So
done
they
the
raised
huge,
confinement chickens in Georgia.
right.
while he was
All the
growing up.
kids worked. There were 4 boys, I guess, and they all worked on it, and they hated it, and they couldn't get away from the farm fast enough, and that whole thing has kind of gone into.
The parents closed down on the confinement operation a few years back,
and it's just gone into dilapidation now. And now this couple that were at the farm are going back to the farm, and they're going to work with their mom and dad, or work with his mom and dad, to regenerate this farm into something else, into a real organic farm. And I think that is so exciting.
That's right. That's right.
Really exciting. That's
Yeah,
so
we
exciting.
love the multi-generational farm. But your mom lives
Your
with you,
folks.
or your
Yeah.
yeah,
With
that's
us.
just fabulous.
And we designed the farm. And now, in a similar story, when we moved here, we had 48 hours in East Tennessee because Tim had wanted to spend the majority of our time. We went on a tour to see where we were going to move after California, and he was targeting.
I was actually spending more time in Texas and Oklahoma. So
It's interesting because I said, if we move to Texas or Oklahoma, we're going to have one more move. And and so when we were here, we didn't think that we were going to stay here. We're in a modular home. We're 5 acres, and there's not like a clear water source that we wanted, but I mean, we can capture it from the sky now. But I was hoping for like a spring fed from the mountain ourselves. But it's just really great because with mom and dad here, we were designing it for them so that they wouldn't trip anywhere. So our garden is right outside the steps of our back. And it just kind of naturally happened to be more of the permaculture. We have zone 1, zone 2, zone 5 out there. But it works. And I keep thinking, well, this works for us. And our dream property did pop up on the market. And I said, oh, this is the one that we've been waiting for 2.5 years. What do you think?
And at this point, it's like, I'm a little bit tired because we have so much livestock, but at the same time, it's like, we want to make sure it's manageable. And what we have, I think we fell into the trap that a lot of people who try to get into homesteading, they just have this dream of, I have to have acres upon acres to be considered a true homesteader. Right. And being here, like, we have 5 usable acres, and we can see, where we can see our plants and all our animals from our kitchen window.
Yeah, when I'm washing the dishes, I can check on
human scale.
People don't know what they're missing when they allow the competitiveness that is built into school and work to form their relationship to their land. Don't notice me. I'm going to run take bread out of the oven.
But that's one of the things about making sure that we don't burn out of this lifestyle.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
We want to make sure that, okay, all the things considered, it is going to be hard for us when we're in our 70s to do to want that property that has the natural spring water coming out of it, right? What we have today, and if mom can walk it, then we should be able to do this. I mean,
the other thing that we watch a lot of people burn out on, and we think it's unfortunate, because is the people who are trying to turn their land into money. It's very, very hard to do that. And you're competing with most of the world. You're competing with Walmart. You're competing with all of those places. And again, they're selling convenience. You're selling high nutrition. And it's very hard for people to believe that that's as important as it is. And there are people like Joel Salatin, who are amazing at being able to turn the farm into money, and he does it remarkably well. but most people don't have those skills. And, our recommendation, we were just at another Amish event, and an Amish man came up to me and he said, what you're saying is exactly right. The farm is not about making money, it's about saving money. And that's always been what we have believed. And then it's almost always easier to make the cash that you need, and we try and make that as small as possible, other ways.
Yeah.
I was a professor for a long time, and then we're making it between the B&B and speaking and stuff like that. They're just easier ways to make the cash that you need. It's just very important that you make that need of cash as small as you can make it.
Right. That's one of the things we said too, is not having to have the pressure of making our farm, making money from the farm, because in that way, with all of the abundance that we have, whether it come from dairy or our vegetables, we can just give freely and
That's
not
right.
feel
That's
like,
right. Absolutely.
this is
Yeah.
worth $5 a pound, for example.
Right.
Absolutely. The other thing that happens there is that we're all coming into relationship with a piece of land and the ecosystem of plants and animals and etc. that live there in a very tight symbiotic relationship. And we're trying to get all of the goodness of the existing ecosystem to stay and be enhanced by what we're doing. And we can't really, we know nothing about this. None of us has any history doing this. We don't know how. So does it make sense to think that an ecosystem that has never exported, with my assistance, is suddenly going to export enough stuff to make a lot of money and still be a sound ecosystem? No, it makes zero sense. It's like saying, I'm going to order off for a bunch of apple trees, plant them, and they're going to support me from day one, right? The first year I'm going to pick a bunch of apples and sell them. It's silly. It's not going to work. And you're going to do damage. You're going to harm stuff.
So then my question is to both of you, what role do you think that our small independent farmsteads like ours, what role does it play in addressing larger issues like food security and sustainability?
The only role that counts. It's the only role that counts. It's the only story we have to tell ourselves that has a hope of taking care of those problems. If you haven't read Chris Smage, Saying No to a Farm-Free Future. So these are Chelsea Green books. Ask somebody to send them to you.
Yeah.
And Simon Fairley's Meet a Benign Extravagance. Read those books. You're a numbers person. You're going to get that. You both are. You're going to get this. They're extremely well documented. And they make the point that I think you already know instinctively. There isn't another solution. There's not another one. So since you can't wave a magic wand and make everybody do the smart thing, you, Sophie, and Tim sit down and do the smart thing, the one solution that counts, which is back up until you have solid ground under your feet, the earth taken care of properly, and start from there. And then I don't know. This is like, you know what it's like? It's just like the gospel, the yeast that's hidden in 3 measures of flour, the salt. This is your little bit that you put out there, and you don't have to know what will happen because you're doing the only thing that makes any sense. Was that fair?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think a lot of us get kind of, we flew over Dallas recently, and there are 10 gazillion, not 10 gazillion little farms. There's 10 gazillion suburban mansions that on little tiny postage stamp lawns.
For miles and miles
right.
and miles, nothing but little houses on little lawns.
And I think you guys are counting on,
oh my gosh,
that the transportation system will not fail. That the food systems will not fail. You're counting on the fact that most farmers now are 65 and older, and they're dying.
The highest suicide rate in the country.
And I think, what you guys are...
what dream are you living in?
That's right. That's right.
What kind of blindfold are you wearing that you go right on thinking that somehow you're going to get fed because you live in a capitalist society and there's money and food. Frankly, there's not much going to the farmer, but people just think, well, it's always been there. It'll always be there. It's somebody's job and they'll just do it and I'll get fed.
And it's really, it's not my job. It's not I mean, what my job is to, when people ask, or even to go, when people go to a conference, they're asking. When they go to a conference, I want to explain to them a way of farming and a way of living that moves us back toward God. And I think that if those people say, I don't need this, or your message doesn't say anything to me, that's not my responsibility. It's not my responsibility to make sure that everybody understands.
Where were we recently? There was another speaker. It was a woman. I can't remember what the topic was, but she stood up and the first thing she said to the crowd was, "It is not my job to grow your food." And I thought, oh, right for the jugular, honey, because that's absolutely right. It's nobody else's job to do someone else's piece of planet management that's supposed to be, like, each of us is called to some kind of care for the creation. And part of that care is the feeding of humanity. It's not like there's some little subset, little, born peons who are supposed to grow food for everybody else.
Yep.
That's where I think the Elon Musks of the world, his environment has been man-made entirely. And in the man-made world, he is very, very good at manipulating energies to get his desired outcome. How can such a smart man not know that our national food supply teeters on the blade of a razor?
Yeah.
But he doesn't know. So he thinks he's going to set up Mars for human habitation. He's in for a surprise.
I mean, for us, it was 2020 and when all the grocery stores shut down completely. Right. And where that was the moment that we realized how we were teetering on just a blade.
Right. And it was very funny for us because people would tell us that was happening. We said, really? They're shutting things down, because we didn't have that experience. I mean, we weren't going to the grocery store and stuff like that. So it was fascinating for us to hear that things like that were happening.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating now, like what Joel says, there's a homestead tsunami.
Yep.
And we're just so blessed to have you both on our show this evening. And thank you so much.
It's been very fun.
What advice would you give to the aspiring farmers or homesteaders who are just starting out on this journey?
Well, the thing that we say, and we say it over and over and over again, is you've got free food on your farm right now. It's the grass. Bring the ruminant onto that and start your adventure and farm with reckless abandon. And, just get after it. But don't start with the commercial system on the small, which is get chickens and then start feeding them feed and stuff like that. Start with the ruminant on the food that you already have.
Right. You're already growing a crop. Start to harvest it and turn it into food and fertility. And that means get a ruminant and graze it properly.
As people say to us all the time, I got my cow and all of a sudden my life is completely different.
Right. And the other thing they say is what Sophie said earlier, I can never go back.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful? And we don't want to go back. We'll just go forward, falling into the Holy Spirit's arms the way you did in 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
And I'm knowing that this is we were never guaranteed this much fun and this kind of adventure when we were in school. We were supposed to be good children who studied and got A's and fit into the corporate world that had jobs for us. And we are so fortunate that here we are climbing Mount Everest and engaged in the most important adventure in centuries. We're so fortunate.
You both are such an inspiration. And for all of our listeners here, if you have not yet grabbed your copy of the Independent Farmstead, grab your copy. And if you are able to listen to both Shawn and Beth at any one of these homesteading festivals, please, please, please come listen to them. They are a wealth of knowledge, as you can hear from this podcast, but also just incredible, loving couple who are truly the blueprint for how we should lead our families, our
You're
farm
very,
life.
very kind.
Thank you. Thank you. It has been such a pleasure sharing this time with you.
Yes. And for anybody out there, I know if you're wanting to follow Shawn and Beth, we are on their mailing list. You have a newsletter on your website, I believe. Can you let people know what your website is?
onecowrevolution.com.
And it's never going to bother you because we only post business. If you want to read posts like how to run chickens over your buckwheat to till it into your garden and add fertility, we're your site, but we don't have anything else there.
That's right.
Just farm information.
And we love it. I love it because I can actually read it. It just gets straight to the point. I appreciate it.
Brevity is the soul of wit.
Well, where else can our listeners find you?
Well, so School of Traditional Skills.
There are videos
we have
out
a
there
couple
that
of
other
videos
people
on there.
have made. Right?
We are negotiating with Chelsea Green right now for some more
For a
books.
series.
So we hope that will come
There's a
through.
I think it's 6-hour
Yep.
video series at Living Web Farms in North Carolina.
Right. We just were interviewed by the Epoch Times, the Epic Times, or yeah. So
Wonderful.
But it's always best to meet you guys in person. And one thing I've noted, and I've heard from a lot of your fans as well, is that how both of you just give individual attention, because we've gone to events where you'll have like this huge line, but each person that comes up to speak to you, they actually feel like they're getting that individual time with you.
I hope that they
feel heard.
I hope that they feel that. We do try and not hide when we speak somewhere. We do try and be available and because again, we want to have that million little farms, and we just have.
And we feel so lucky to be part of the homesteading family.
Right.
We really, I mean, all of us. The homesteading movement is really about dropping competition and becoming cooperative, loving, sharing, fellow stewards of the land, and we feel so blessed to be part of that family.
The community, again, you have these things every once in a while where it's a tangible thing, and when our house burned down, there was a GoFundMe it was really and
it filled up in just a couple of days. We and all the boys were saying, shut it down. We've got enough. Other people out there who need help. We were so gratified. If we can just end with our thanks to everybody out there who's helped make our house rebuild the joyful thing it is.
Yeah,
that's so good. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys. It's been great. It's been a total pleasure. God bless y'all.
God bless you.